Hey everybody, this is Blast from the Past.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, how's it going, Ragnar?
It's going great because we're doing a podcast on a game that I love.
Hell yes.
You're doing well too. Before we start, last time I asked a few people for some feedback and they said, hey, it was a great podcast, but you forgot one thing. You forgot to introduce yourself. And I thought, that's a good idea. Because, I mean, maybe some people don't know who we are. So, Michael, who are you, actually?
Hi. So my name's Mike, or Michael. I am a freelance writer local to Atlanta in the United States, and I've been starting a YouTube channel on the side, Dreaming in Neon. Check me out.
Yes, links in the description, and my name is Ragnar, and I'm also one of those people who thought not to do a regular job anymore and start YouTube, and for some reason it kind of worked out. So I also have a YouTube channel. It's called RagnarRox, and the links are also in the description. I've been a game developer and game designer before, and on my channel I also talk about game design and with a slight tendency towards horror games. And the two of us, we decided to take our love for video games further to a podcast where we can reminisce about old games that we loved from our childhood.
Really experiencing these classic experiences with experiencing experiences. Wow, great job, Mike. I'm off to a rip-roaring start here. No, experiencing these classic games with kind of like fresh eyes and the perspective, the wisdom of age. It's been a real delight so far. I've really been enjoying this.
Same here. So that's why we picked a game we both are kind of very excited about, which is
Master of Magic.
Master of Magic. What a wonderful game. All right. Some people of you might feel very warm, tingly feelings right now. Some people might not know anything about the game. So let's sum it up a little bit. So what's Master of Magic?
So I think the pat description is kind of like, oh, it's civilization with magic. And there's there's a little bit of truth to that. Because, you've got like kind of the classic 4X formula. It's turn-based, you're kind of like trying to create this empire out of nothing, and then you try to create an empire that spans an entire planet. Made by micropros, during this golden era of turn-based strategy games. Like, there's definitely some similarities, but the thing that makes Master of Magic so special is that there are all of these additional systems that are kind of like layered on top of the civilization skeleton that really like flesh it out and make it so customizable and replayable. And there's such kind of this rich lore and art style. It's a remarkable game.
I totally agree. But yeah, before we go on, like you said, a 4X game.
Yes.
Can you get it together what the 4X's stand for?
Yeah, so the 4X's are, if I'm remembering this correctly, it is exploit, explore, expand, and exterminate.
Yeah,
which is,
I think that's completely right, except for the order.
Oh, damn.
Because you start with exploring, and then... I mean, I have it right before me, so that's kind of cheating. So it's explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. And basically all games in the vein of Civilization and similar are titled not just strategy games, but sometimes called global strategy games or this 4X genre, which means, so the similarities to Civilization, I mean, I'm sorry, as always, I have little hiccups. Maybe it's the nervosity.
Right. We're in the presence of greatness here. We're soaking it in.
Yeah, precisely. So maybe some people don't even know what Civilization is all about. And for those, let's really start to describe. It's civilization with magic, which sounds great. But how does a typical match of Master of Magic even begin? Like, how does it work out? How do we start? What do we do?
So you start out on this big empty world map where you're just kind of, you've got your settler unit and, oh wait, that's in Civilization. Master of Magic, you start out right with the city. So basically in Civilization, you start out with a settler and you kind of get to choose where to place your city. In Master of Magic's case, you start out and you have your starting city. which you get to name, and you get to pick one of these fantastical, like quasi-medieval races. You can pick elves, you can pick like frogmen, you can pick lizard men, dwarves, and they all have different traits, and they can produce different units. And the strategy of the game you're going to play is going to change dramatically depending on which of these races you pick. And this is just one of the many ways that this game offers you the way to customize your experience. Because we totally forgot that before you're even placing your city down, you have to customize your wizard. Like you have to select your sort of avatar hero who's going to represent you throughout the world, and you have to select what their spell specialization is going to be and whether they have any special abilities.
To go a little bit into detail there, so you can either choose one of 4 pre-made magicians. Like, for example, there's Merlin, there's Freya. For example, Merlin is a sorcerer, Freya is more specified on nature spells and all that kind of stuff. Or you can create a custom magician, so you can give him a name, or her, and you can assign them different books of magic from 5 different magic realms. And that's a little bit like in Magic the Gathering.
Yes.
So you have like the life magic, which is a lot about healing or buffs like heroism for your units. You have the nature spells, which are, there are a lot of creatures. For example, you can summon like sprites. Then you have the sorcery realm, which has a lot to do with counter magic or making things stronger or
creating illusions. Like you can create illusory units and make your opponents think an army is there when it isn't.
Or stop time, but I'm going to talk about that later. The chaos and death, those are kind of the dark magics. And you kind of make your own magician, or you can even choose to not go with any magic at all. This is also a way to go. You can create a mixture. So, for example, a life, nature, chaos magician. Create your own magician. Then you start out and you start building your first city. And you start to expand, you start to grow the city, you build units, you send them over the map, you explore, you find other magicians, you find other cities, you either conquer or you engage in diplomacy, even though I think diplomacy is not the strong suit of the game.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind, all these little facets and systems you're talking about, is how detailed and how granular they are. And I think that's what, this is one of the reasons why people obsess over these games so much, is that all of this stuff we're talking about, you get to pick what units and buildings you want your cities to produce. You can set your tax and trade policy, you can create worker units to try to reshape the land and build roads and, farm or irrigate stuff, or try to there are spells you can use to try to change mountains into plains and make them more fertile and productive. Like on top of all of this regular empire building gameplay, through the vehicle of quote unquote magic, magic is a great excuse to give you a way to kind of manipulate and play with all of the different levers and toggles of the game's individual systems. It's so magical.
Magical, yeah. So one thing I always thought about the game is the comparison to Civilization is absolutely obvious. The surface game is literally a copy of Civilization 1, down to very minute details, down to the look. And it's interesting. The game, let's talk about when it was released. It was released in 1994 by the developer studio Simtex. And they were published by Microprose. And Microprose was actually the company founded by Sid Meier, the guy who made Civilization. And I think it was probably good, because otherwise Sid Meier might have sued them. Because it's sometimes, in many ways, I'm just joking, but in many ways the game is very, very similar. For example, when you have a city, you look at everything top down, and
you get kind of a pictorial view of your city and all of the individual structures and upgrades you've built, and the city changes in size, and you get different monuments and buildings depending on how big it is. It's very kind of not tactile, but it's interactive and responsive to how you're playing the game.
True. Yeah, exactly. And there's also a lot of emphasis put on micromanagement. And this is actually something that I never really realized when I played the game when I was young. Because when I was young, I gotta say, I wasn't the best strategist. So
definitely not me either.
I mostly played these. I mean, how old was I when I played this? Like 12, 13 maybe? Yeah, something like that. I mean, if it's 1994, let's think about it.
I was 10 or 11 years old. My God, has it been that long?
Exactly, yeah.
No, maybe 9 or 10. My gosh.
And then at that time, I usually would play the game on an easy mode and not play very strategically deep. But I actually watched some people play it on YouTube, which is something we didn't have before. And the best strategists, they constantly change things that you just, for example, mentioned, like the taxes. You constantly change taxes to not have your population in the cities riots. So you always try to keep the taxes at a level where no one riots, but you get like the maximum amount of money. Or you constantly sell your mana for money, or the other way around. Stuff like that. And we already go into very minute details of the game. For example, the mana system. Magic is such a logical expansion to the original Civilization formula, if you ask me.
Yeah, that was what struck me replaying the game, was just that it's totally natural. Like, I think, they could have gone another way and done it sci-fi, but like you see, like, there is the framework for the Civilization game, and then you kind of ask yourself, well, what if we could give players like all of these levers in ways they could affect the world in like ways that don't really fit in with like a historical strategy simulator. But like, if you have the excuse of magic, of sorcery, whatever, like that kind of gives you an in-universe
freedom.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's magic. You can do whatever you want with it.
Precisely, that's what I mean by this. Think about Civilization, right? All these, I like to call them alternate history games. In Civilization, there's always a story that's told, but because Civilization is based on real-world history, most of the times it gets kind of hilarious. Like, the most famous example is Gandhi coming around with nuclear weapons,
Yes.
You do know, I think we talked about, you do know why Gandhi is known for being so aggressive with nuclear weapons in modern civilizations, where this meme came from?
That was from Civ 4, right?
Civ 4, yeah. There was a funny little programming mistake.
Right.
And there's like this value that determines the aggressiveness of a civilization. And this value is coded as an integer. And you can either, like when you program, you can either specify an integer to have negative values or to don't, which is then an unsigned integer, which means it stops at 0. And then if you reduce the amount just by 1, it jumps back up to the maximum amount with like 65,000 something. So the aggressiveness was an unsigned integer that would go from 1 to 10. And Gandhi, of course, was on the lowest setting. But when you invented democracy, every civilization on the map would lower their aggressiveness by 2. And Gandhi would become the most aggressive motherfucker on the entire board.
That's great. That's a great bug. I mean, it was obviously caused some dissonance there, but yeah, that's great.
So that's why Gandhi would be the one, after you invented democracy, who would nuke everybody to death.
But getting back to what you just said about like being able to like build stories out of Master of Magic, that is the other thing that I remembered. I mean, I was really nostalgia tripping playing this game because I remembered just how much fun I had as a kid, like building my own stories around whatever I was doing in the game. And every time you played it, like you're booting up another epic tale that's going to take you told over 10, 20, 30 hours, however many long your game lasts. Like you really you construct these narratives about, I started out with this small little hamlet and then it grew up, I maximized the island I was on and then our ships ventured across the sea and then I mastered the arcane arts and I was able to summon sky dragons to aid my warriors. And then I discovered a portal to a mystic realm that seemed to be like a mirror of where I am. And I met all these strange creatures. Like every game you're able to kind of like build your own narrative. And there's this whole thing about like, we love games where it kind of challenges you to fill in the blanks with your own imagination. I think there's a lot of appreciation these days for games that do that. And I would say that Master of Magic is really just, it is like a quintessential example of a game that like encourages the player to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, what I was basically building up to that, because the original Civilization, there is always a lot of narrative dissonance. It's kind of a weird term, but you have these situations where, for example, I don't know, an old tribe comes around the corner with like bowmen and archers, and then you have like your tanks, and then the bowmen.
One Abrams just rolling them over. Yeah.
Exactly. And yeah, but then because it's just a dice roll, these archers would just destroy the tank, and it just
well, they were pikemen and they were fortified. Like, come on, that's like a 6 defense value there, man. Like, that's how it works.
It's always kind of dissonant, but in this magic realm, for example, you don't have like different time periods. But if there was, like, for example, a little unit that would beat a giant troll or something, because it is very abstract. You have just like these little tiny units on your board, so you don't really see what happens. You just have like these little tactical battles. We have to talk about that in a bit.
Yes, I was about to say, yeah.
When something like this happened, like for example, a unit that was way weaker than like a big troll, you would imagine it like a fight, like in Lord of the Rings, like
exactly.
Like the troll in Moria against those few little dwarves and halflings, and you craft your own narratives in your mind, and it works so wonderfully with this game. And to add insult to injury, because it also gives you a lot of ammunition, because the game kind of seems like the paradise for every game designer. It's feature creep. It feels
a little bit, yeah.
It feels like they really had this idea to say, like, all right, we have a Civilization-like game, but we want to set it in a magic realm. So let's do a brainstorming. What magic units do we want? And then everybody says something like dwarves, elves, minotaurs, whatever, like barbarians, draconians, lizardmen, and everything that got on the whiteboard found its way into the game.
It made its way in. I mean, it's crazy how much variety there is. You have 18 different races, and every race
14.
has at least like, well, what were you going to say? Did I get the number wrong?
Yes, 14 races. I actually looked it up before, so it's not like I'm
14.
I'm a walking compendium.
But yeah, so 14 races. Every race has like at least 6, maybe up to 10 unique units that kind of like change the way you play. It has its own traits and factors that kind of like influence your play style. There's the 5 different schools of magic. Every school of magic has its own set of like 8 to 10 summoned monsters or summoned creatures that you can add to your army, and there's dozens of spells that affect the world or your units in different ways. Like, it's feature creep, and yet it's never... There's so much. I don't quite know how to describe it, but like, it all feels like such a natural process of discovery as you unlock these different systems, that it never really feels like you're being overwhelmed. I think like the game does a really good job of kind of like drip feeding stuff to you, so that you can play at just the simple, I just want to play at the basic empire management level, but then like as deep as you want to go, the game is kind of like there and ready to guide you into like all these wacky spells and ways you can customize your experience.
Exactly, yeah. And also, for example, we just mentioned the spells. And for those of you who know Civilization games, in Civilization you always have like the global strategy layer, and you have something like a technological tree or a tech tree. So stuff that you can research to push your civilization further into modern times. And what's the tech tree in Civilization games? That's basically the spells in this game. So you start out with like a basic set of spells that's determined by how strong the magician you picked is. Like, you could also start with almost no spells at all if your magician is weak. And then over time you research new spells, and over time you gather a stronger and bigger spell book, and they can change the entire game, or they can be as minute as just summoning a new unit. But there are also spells that would like change the entire rule set of the map, and depending on how powerful they are, the more mana you need for them. And then again, you can, for example, there are different ways to generate mana. For example, you build specific buildings in your towns, like temples and shrines, that would generate mana over time. It's like just one currency in the game, aside from money and food. And that's also something that I personally found very interesting, how food is handled. Because normally in these games, food is what determines your city's growth. And in this case, the city's growth is mostly determined by the race that inhabits your cities. As we
It's
said,
like it's the race, and then the terrain your city is on can affect it. There are different buildings you can build or spells you can cast to boost the birth rate. But yeah, generally, yeah, that's interesting. That food is something you need to maintain a population. It's not like there was that you did need that in Civilization, but like extra food kind of helped you. Made your city grow faster, and that's not the case in Master of Magic. It's a more, I think there's this notion that like, you know, each of these different races that you select for your cities kind of like have their own birth rates, so it's something that's more affected by this internal system rather than, you know, just having a bunch of granaries.
And food is especially very important for your armies, meaning that every unit you have on the board they eat a certain amount of food per round. And if your amount of food is lower than what they need, then you just start losing units. They just die within the round. This adds an interesting strategic layer that's actually quite realistic to actual large-scale warfare, because a large army needs to be fed. Napoleon can tell a tale of that. And in this case, for example, if you decide, okay, I'm going to build a huge army and then I'm going to attack the cities of this magician, then you have to keep in mind that they eat. And the more units you produce, the more food you need, and the less production your cities can do because they have to focus on food. And those were things that I found out upon replaying the game. For example, one very legit strategy is to either conquer or build another city that's entirely dedicated to producing food. Like you have these food hubs. And it works so well, and it gives you this feeling of being this warlord who really...
Well, it's not only that. You'll have, you know, as you expand your empire, it's like, okay, I've conquered a race now that is better at farming. I have a halfling city now, and they're great at farming, so I can just set that all to farmers, and now that's great. You know, that'll supply food for my empire, and now I can turn all my other cities to workers, and I don't need to worry about food for them anymore.
Exactly. Or one of the most interesting playthroughs that I did, for example, was I decided to go basically without magic with dwarves and focus entirely on production and gold, like you would imagine dwarves in a Tolkienish fantasy
serious dwarf role playing. Yeah, absolutely.
And I was blown away by how well this worked. It was fantastic because I literally put all the emphasis on production and gold, which means even the cities that usually, like, for example, if you capture a new city that's kind of small, or you build a new city, it usually takes a long time for the necessary buildings that a city needs to become a little more powerful or a little bigger, to be built. But with an army of dwarves that's always rich, you can just buy all these buildings, and a new city is population size 7 or 8 within a few rounds, just because you have so much money. It's really, really interesting. And
it's now the flip side to that is that, you know, there are also races that are not as good as production and not as good as farming, but they're very like magically powerful. So like me personally, I always like to play either the high elves or the dark elves. That was my jam, because, you know, basically like in addition to generating food or generating production, like certain races can also generate magic, which if you're a magic casting, if you like go heavy on the magic, like it's very naturally advantageous for you to have cities that can also like passively generate mana for you. So yeah, I mean, and that's just one of the ways. Or, you know, then there are races that are like there's the Beastmen. They have some special characteristic like governing like hostility to other races. Like they absolutely, like, if they're ever conquered by another race, like I think them and the dwarves, like they're just totally you'll always have riots or unrest, you know, like these all of these races kind of like have their own unique traits that like really it's not just like, oh, I'm running across an enemy city or a neutral city, you know, I can just steamroll it. Like once you capture it, you have to like really think and be strategic about like how you incorporate it into your empire.
Yeah, that's also something that I noticed. These beastmen, they are natural rebels. If you conquer them, those cities are problem cities, which kind of made me adopt the strategy like, oh, I just conquered a beastman city. Well, let's raise it.
Yeah, just build one of our cities in its place. That's we're conquerors. That's how it works.
And that's I always like when such a game that gives you this narrative distance to what you're doing turns you automatically into like a leading psychopath, that you just do decisions without thinking about what it would mean for the people down there.
Well, and I think that one also, like, I remember, like, if you choose to do that, you know, periodically throughout the game, you'll get these little cards that have these very, like, dramatic illustrations on them indicating, like, oh, our troops were exploring a dungeon, or enemy soldiers have sacked our city. So, like, I remember, especially if you choose to raise a city, it's like a picture of someone, like, screaming in horror as they're fleeing from, like, a burning town. And, you know, you see, like, you have lost however much fame and renown for doing this. Like, the game really, like... it's so evocative. It's so evocative.
So what do you need the fame for? Fame is also kind of like a sort of, not currency, but it's an attribute.
A soft currency, yeah.
A soft currency, yeah, nice. So fame, what does it do?
So fame, that is kind of, it's like a luck stat. If we were to think about it in RPG terms, it's like a luck stat. Like, the more fame you have, the more likely that highly skilled mercenaries or heroes are going to want to come and offer their services to you. And when they do, you know, they won't ask for as much money, or it won't be as expensive to maintain them. More fame means, you know, you're more likely to find powerful spells or powerful artifacts. Go ahead.
It's basically the heroes that I wanted to get to. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say, because we didn't even mention the heroes. This is something that newer Civilization games kind of adopted later on, but that was in Master of Magic from the start. And I mean, it makes sense that it has this whole additional role-playing layer that heroes, would
you get RPG, a hero out of an RPG game, like, comes, and you get to have them as a unit in your army, and there, you know, you could have the dwarf, or there's a lizard man, there's the mystic sage, the healer, the ninja assassin, the bowman. Like, it's great, it's fantastic.
And you can level them up, you can give them new specs, and you can even equip them with armor, weapons, items that makes them stronger. And that's quite interesting in how it works, because if you get a new hero on level 1, they're mostly not even a lot better than standard ground units that you can just build in a city. But if you really got to protect them in the fight so that they don't die, so that they level up, and then you got to equip them with items. But if you really keep on training them and equipping them and really treat them well and get them up to higher levels, those heroes can turn into outright one-man armies. Like,
I have so many fond memories of, you know, literally you get one of your two heroes up to maximum rank, you just cast all the buff spells on them, and even on the harder difficulties, you could have just one or two of those, like, super stacked heroes, just toss them at an enemy city and completely steamroll it. Like, they just stood no chance. It's like you were literally commanding these figures out of Greek mythology or something. It was amazing.
It was really amazing, especially since the cities, they have city walls with a large gate, and your hero really just comes up to the gate, archers shooting arrows at them, and they're like, oh my god, I'm just gonna kick in this town wall, and I'm just gonna kill everybody. And it felt so satisfying, because I don't know if you share that sentiment, but I always found that the real-time the tactical combat, we should talk about this right now.
Yes, another.
I always found that it was a very difficult component about the game, difficult to master.
Yeah, it adds a layer of complexity for sure. I mean, like, I remember that I found that very frustrating and difficult, like, the first couple of times I played Master of Magic. And I think, you know, that was one of the things with the benefit of hindsight. Like, I kind of already knew how to play the game, so I didn't find it as frustrating playing it again. But I think for new players, that might definitely be a sticking point. So basically what we're talking about here is, in Civilization, normally when you have a combat encounter, you know, the two tiles of units, they bump together, and then one wins or one doesn't.
Yeah, it's a dice throw.
Exactly. There's a dice roll, and then it's resolved. Now, not so in Master of Magic. In Master of Magic, when, you know, you move a unit onto an enemy unit's tile, you then go to this isometric, like, tactical combat view that's tile-based, basically, where you, like, each side has a certain number of actions per unit per turn. And you try to move them around the board and use their abilities and defeat the opponent. And it's very complicated. You can use your spells during combat, which can help you kind of like turn the tide of a battle, summon creatures, attack the enemy with fireballs. So there's a lot in play there. Like, on one hand, it is difficult, and like it's easy to kind of get overwhelmed and have your units get crushed and just feel like, shit, that sucks. But on the other hand, like, if you know how to play the game, if you know how to use the different systems, there's a lot of options there where you can have like a ragtag, underwhelming force, but with a little bit of luck and the proper spells, like you can totally
Chaos Rift.
Yes, exactly. You can you beat the odds and overcome your opponent.
In a way, I always thought that this is the part where the civilization with magic meets Heroes of Might and Magic. Because that's where, in my eyes, these two games kind of merged. Even though I believe that... When was the first Heroes of Might and Magic? Because when I think Heroes of Might and Magic, I always think of the third game, because that's the one I played to death.
I'm struggling to remember. You know what? I'm going to have to look it up.
Yeah, look that up. I mean, we have the internet
Heroes
right now.
of Might and Magic. I wanted to see if I could remember it on my own, because I miss my pre-internet brain, but we should look this up.
I believe that Heroes of Might and Magic 3 came after, definitely came after Master of Magic, but I think the first...
the first one came after Master of Magic. This one came in 95. Heroes of Might and Magic, a strategic quest.
Look at that. So maybe there's even inspiration taken from Master of Magic. It wouldn't surprise me, because it's also a very logical expansion of the Civilization formula. Because who didn't think, when you played Civilization, there should be something that makes these fights less than just dice rolls? And so that stuff like an archer kills a tank doesn't just happen, but at least it is explained in some kind of battle view. And this is exactly what happens. And it means you can stack up armies. You can stack up 10 swordsmen, 5 pikemen, and a few heroes, and then some archers. And as soon as you enter battle, you have all these units stacked up next to each other, and you control all of them with their different speeds and their different abilities. You have your ranged combat fight, which is extremely important to always have ranged combat with you. So you can, if you engage only close quarter units, you can basically mostly kill, or at least weaken most of them before they even reach your close quarter fighters, and so on. There's a lot of tactical layers.
And then each of these individual units can have special abilities or special properties. Like maybe they're, transparent, so your melee attacks miss 50% of the time. Maybe they can fly, so they can only defend themselves from your attacks, and you can attack them freely. Like, there's all sorts of, in addition to just this kind of basic isometric combat, like almost every single individual unit has some sort of tweak or quirk or trait that makes it interesting and adds something to the tableau.
Yeah, exactly. I was overwhelmed by flying units in the beginning, so I didn't even know why my ground forces couldn't hurt them. Then I found out that flying units actually does give you a huge advantage, and the next round I played, I completely put everything on sprites and other flying units, and then I felt super powerful.
Easy mode is basically you pick the magician, your starting magician. You pick the one who has the draconian race, because all of the draconian units have wings and are flying.
That makes sense. Is draconian one of the Mirren races?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Because then let's
that
mention
brings us to another
Mirror.
great point. Yeah.
So let's not compare to Heroes of Might and Magic 3, because we just found out that all the Heroes of Might and Magics came after this. So it probably basically goes back to Master of Magic, that there is not just one overworld, but there is a second, a darker mirror world of the overworld you start on. Or maybe
to use a Zelda analogy, because that's in the news right now. It is the dark world to the regular light world,
and it's called Mirror. I'm pronouncing it weirdly because it's spelled with a Y, so it's called Mirror. And the people that inhabit this realm are called the Mirrens. Makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of the harder, the darker version of the overworld.
It is basically the normal game turned up to 11. You know, the resources are more plentiful and bountiful. The units are tougher and stronger. The enemies are more difficult. The spells are more intense. Like, it's basically like the base experience, and then it's really like you flip it over to the dark side and you really just dial up.
One thing I always or often did to turn Mirror into an easier start, you can actually generate a magician that is allowed to start in this world as opposed to the standard world. And if you do that and actually pick one of the 14 magicians that would start on Mirror, because there are only 2 who can start on Mirror, you have 1 opponent max on your entire map. So the beginning is a lot easier because you have no opposition that you have to fight against.
But the wandering monsters are a lot tougher, which can be deadly for newer players. I have many a game has been sunk by wandering werewolves and packs of skeletons and ghouls on Mirror.
And worms.
Yes.
Those
the great worms. Oh my god, those green nightmares.
They are truly nightmares. But this is not the only way. They can attack you. They can roam the island, either on Mirror or on the normal world. And we're talking about a Tolkien-esque magic realm, magic universe here. One thing that is basically tied to magic, like peas and carrots, is dungeon crawling. Like, there have to be heroes and soldiers that venture into dark dungeons and fight evil monsters. And you would say, like, okay, but this is a strategy game. This is grand strategy, so this aspect is probably not in there. But guess again, it's Master of Magic. It's feature creep. It's game designer's paradise. Of course, you have dungeon crawling, even though in a small way. But let's go back to the Civilization analogy, because it's the easiest way to explain the game to people who know Civilization and not Master of Magic. In Civilization, you sometimes find ruins or some other places that give you some bony.
You might discover a technology. Maybe you get a little bit of gold. You find a friendly unit that wants to join your cause or something like that. Usually,
Master of Magic has the same element, where you can find fields with, for example, a tower or a dungeon or a cave or something. But in this case, it could happen that it is populated with some evil monsters. And it's not that easy, especially not in the beginning, if your units are still weak, to conquer this, to get this bonus that is hidden in there. So it kind of adds this Diablo-esque dungeon crawler
a little
idea.
bit, yeah.
So, you know,
and you're incentivized to do it because one of the big treasures you can get is artifacts from these dungeons, which can really, like, as powerful as your heroes are, artifacts are like giving them these special items is kind of what turns them really into demigods.
So this is also one of the other very interesting and fascinating components about it. So I was really surprised by how well it is still playable, even though we're kind of used to more modern 4X games like, I don't know, Stellaris or the newer Civilization iterations, which are much more polished towards usability. But this game still feels very, very accessible. And I would actually love to know how somebody who didn't play these games back in the day, but a younger gamer who would approach this game today would get along with this game, if it would be as easily approachable.
I think it might be. It's a tough sell if you're not a fan of strategy games, because it does have a very old school look. You know, like, it's entirely sprite based. The pace is slow. You know, like, it's a pretty, like, methodical game. You know, like, this is not a rapid fire strategy game. So I think in that sense, go ahead.
Yeah, even though I thought that too all the time, but as I said, I watched some other people play to get some other perspectives. It was actually very interesting. So it's one of the most fascinating things to look up some different Let's Plays to this game and see how other people approach it, because it shows you just how much more versatile this game even is than you already thought. I've seen so many different strategies, like the vastly different strategies. And what I also noticed is that most of these players, they've been playing this game for a very, very, very long time, so they're very adept with it, and they binge through the game. It's so fast, you can't. It almost looks a little bit like, you know, these Tetris
MLG level.
Yes.
Master of Magic. My God.
It's pretty fascinating and quite charming, to be honest. So one thing I wanted to address, and I think you wanted to talk about this too, is the studio that created Master of Orion, Simtex,
Yes.
with the lead game designer Steve Barcia. They are known for not too many games. One of them is this, and the other one is called Master of Orion, which is also one of the most prolific 4X games of all time. In this case, Master of Orion, a science fiction version of it. And I've often heard people compare Master of Magic with Master of Orion. I personally could never see it. But you said you found something about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the games definitely share DNA in the sense that I think the thing that comes most readily to mind for me is that Master of Orion is certainly much more focused on kind of like the grand space strategy. Like it's much more about building a galactic empire and building fleets of ships than like, exploration and role playing in the way that Master of Magic is. But I think where I see the commonality between the two is that the planet management in Master of Orion is very similar to me to the way you would manage your cities and towns in a game like Master of Magic or Civilization. Like, I think there's definitely a through line in that land management, empire management, the sim aspect of it, I guess.
Especially in regards to the whole micromanagement optimization. Right. Like, if you want to play these games, ideally, you would really shift and move around every single city, maybe each turn even, right? One thing that I found, it's just a curious little finding, is that both of these games have something in common with the game we talked about in the first episode of this podcast, which was Loom. Because all of these games had the same person to do the soundtracks.
Oh my god.
It was the Fat Man. He was like kind of a MIDI soundtrack legend back in the day, and he was responsible for the soundtrack of both of these games. And that makes a lot of sense thinking about it, because the Loom soundtrack, we talked about this in the last episode, is absolutely beautiful. It's a wonderful rendition of Tchaikovsky. And the soundtrack of Master of Magic has something that just a couple of games managed to pull off, because it both has very distinctive melodies that it's not decent in the background. It's really there. It's a prominent melody, something that sticks in your mind that you would assume gets on your nerves like after a few minutes, but it doesn't. You can play it for hours, and at least for me, the music never gets on my nerves. It just goes on and on and on, and it's very, as I said, it's very prominent, but it's beautiful.
It's pleasant. It does its job well. Like, there's this saying that like, oh, the best game music is the stuff that you don't even notice it. That's how it's doing its job, And I don't think. Yeah, I don't agree with that either. Like, I think these are examples of games that can have music that like stands out and is distinct and has its like a flavor and character that you need to pay attention to, but enhances the experience. It adds sentiment, or it adds like a color or an emotion to whatever is going on screen.
Yeah, and also something that gets the memories flowing once you hear it. Like, it's a wonderful count.
Yes.
Speaking of which, do you want to do a little music example right here? Like, a little listening example? Because we've, of course, once again prepared something. This is an audio medium, so we gotta use the entire capability, right? So the first music that I prepared here is the most common background theme that you hear all the time in Master of Magic, as long as you're not engaged in battle, which is this. And you can totally hear what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. Oh man, I'm like hard flashbacks right now, man. It takes you back.
And that's what I meant. It has a distinctive melody, and once you hear it years after playing it, you're instantly taken back, but it never gets on your nerves.
Yeah, it's both like distinct and still somehow like unobtrusive at the same time.
Exactly. So let's take another example of, this is a very upbeat and happy music and another background theme is a little bit more negative, and I found out that it actually has to do with how well your civilization is doing, which background musics are playing. I never knew that, but apparently, according to some guide that I looked up on the internet, this is the case, kind of a dynamic soundtrack long before that was even a thing. And it is this.
It's chills, shivers up my spine.
I literally got slight goosebumps right now. It's really, really beautiful, and it was even a version that I wasn't used to because it used a different sound card. We also talked about this in the last episode.
I was about to say that like my experience with the sound was a little different because I had a super crappy sound card in my PC growing up, so it was definitely not as rich as this. This is like, this is the true nostalgia goggles experience. I'm remembering it better than it actually was for me.
Yeah, well, quite an interesting observation actually, because nostalgia goggles usually make you remember a game far better than it actually was. Quite interesting. A game that will release soon is Thimbleweed Park by Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick, the guys who made Maniac Mansion, the original Maniac Mansion. And Thimbleweed Park is a point-and-click adventure that is supposed to bring back that feeling. It's supposed to feel like an old LucasArts game that you found in your drawer and for some reason always overlooked. You never knew it was there, but it was there.
Like Day of the Tentacle, like when you go into the room and you get the computer and all of a sudden there's Maniac Mansion inside Day of the Tentacle. It's like that. It's like so you somehow stumbled upon this lost LucasArts game that was always there, but nobody knew about it. Nobody talked about it for whatever reason.
Exactly. And one thing that Ron Gilbert said about their goal for Thimbleweed Park is it's supposed to be a game that feels like you remember those games and not like those games actually were. Because he says nostalgia goggles make us remember games actually a lot better than they were most of the time. And I wanted to say that because I was actually positively surprised by Master of Magic. I remember that I had a very good time with it, but I was positively surprised by how well it held up despite my nostalgia goggles. So it seemed like my memory was not tinted at all by nostalgia blindness.
I had the same experience. I went into it very self-conscious because it had been a few years. I think it had been at least 5 or 6 years since I had played it. So I thought, okay, I really want to, give myself.
For me, it was more like 20.
Oh, damn, yeah. I really wanted to, give myself be honest about it, appreciate the game for what it did right, but also remember, you got to be honest about it going back to it. But yeah, it was better than I remember it. I was blown away by how complex it was, how intricate the systems were, and yet how approachable the game was all at the same time. It was really a joy to rediscover this game in a way that I almost wasn't expecting.
And maybe this is one of the reasons why a good remake never could come together. Master of Magic is actually one of the games that has been attempted to be remade to create a spiritual successor of so many times, and it never came together. There's one game that's on Steam right now. It's called Worlds of Magic, which is an obvious attempt to bring back that feeling, but it's not good. It's just there are all the elements in there, but they don't work together. It's like you have all the elements of Master of Magic, but you put them together in the wrong order, and it looks like abstract art, kind of.
And and isn't that just what's so absolutely freaking special about Master of Magic is that, like, when you look at, like, exactly what you're talking about, feature creep, game designer's paradise, like, there's so many moving parts and there's so many systems. Like, there's no way it should work. It should be a disaster. Like, it's almost a sandbox game. There's so much you can control in it. By modern principles, like, it's way too cluttered. This game would never get $200 million in funding and advertising or whatever you need to make a game these days. Like, it's way too much. And yet, despite, like, all of this delicate balancing act the game apparently needs to do, like, it pulls it off. It absolutely pulls it off.
It feels like it didn't have a feature stop. It's like during development, developers and game designers and artists, and they all contribute new ideas to a concept. And at some point, to make it financially feasible, you just have to say, okay, now feature stop. Every idea that comes now, we can't implement it. And it feels like this game just never did that. They just said, hey, whoa, I just had this idea. We should introduce like a second world that mirrors the first one. It's like, all right, let's do it. Fuck it. And everything gets a pass because why the fuck not? Okay. Let's be honest here. It might sound like the game is absolutely perfect, but if there's one thing that is definitely suboptimal, it's balancing, but it's a necessary thing. There are a lot of ways in which you can cheese the game, or in which the game can cheese you. There are so many different spells and units and attributes and ways to work this game that there necessarily have to be some... Sorry, hiccup again. It's going to be a staple of this podcast, my hiccups.
I like it a lot.
Yes. At least we have something that makes us human, I guess. There just have to be ways in which you can create a dominant strategy.
Yeah.
And this is basically unavoidable. Every game has that in some ways. And in Master of Magic, there are actually some really hilarious ways in which you can cheese it, and some really impressive ways, actually. But one thing I also found is that finding one of those, because it was in a time when you just didn't look up like a guide or a walkthrough to a game that gives you the best strategies.
Yeah, you had to go to like the Web 1.0 GeoCities fan page. Like, welcome to my Master of Magic fan page. Click here for my guides and sign the guest book.
No, I mean, like if you found that out on your own, like one of these strategies, and you saw like, oh, I just totally broke the game. It still worked within the magician's narrative. It still gave you that feeling like, oh my god, now I'm Sauron, like now I'm
that was exactly what I was gonna say, because I was gonna ask you what your cheat strat is, because mine was always like it was always just so easy. Like, you just research the create artifact spell. It lets you create your own artifact. You can spend a ridiculous amount of money and create a super powerful sword or suit of armor and give it to a hero, and then they become unstoppable. Like, it's very reliable, reliable.
Well, my strategy is a little bit more complicated, and you can't do it every time because it involves a spell that's quite rare. That's the time stop. Have you ever had the time stop spell?
I didn't play sorcery a lot, but I do remember on one run through that, I did manage to cast it.
So time stop is basically a very late game spell, and it's also replayability. It's also randomized which spells you even get to research. So you don't get it every playthrough. But if you
the only way you can get every single spell in a school is if you focus on that school and nothing else. Like, you take no other spell schools and no other traits. Like, you just put all your beginning wizard points into that specific school.
Exactly. And for this cheese strategy, it's not possible because you also need a few retorts. Retorts are basically like perks in role-playing games. You can have different perks. Like in this case, for example, you can be an artificer and a rune master. So time stop is a very expensive spell that is expensive to cast and expensive to keep up. But what it does is it lets you move units, but every other magician can't do anything.
And most importantly, in combat, your enemy units can't move. They're just totally glued in place.
Exactly. So you would think, oh, this is extremely overpowered. But as I said, it's extremely expensive. And also you have to keep paying a lot of mana per round to keep it up. So it's designed to work maybe 2 or 3 rounds.
Right. So the costs are so high that I think it was built with the intention that, like, no one's going to be able to, like, keep this going for more than a handful of turns.
But if you are an artificer and a rune master, then you can create artifacts every round, and you will change the ratio with which you sacrifice your artifacts. You can sacrifice an artifact and get mana for it. So, and if you do that, you buy an artifact for, say, 200 mana, and then you sacrifice it for 400.
Yeah, I already see where you're going
And
with this.
then you can keep up the time stop forever. And this is basically a god mode in the end, because
See, I didn't even know that was a cheese strat, and now that's so cool. I feel like I want to start the game up and try it.
And there are so many different ways like that. And I don't even know a quarter of them, or not even like a tenth, or probably not even 100. There's so much variety. And like, think about it, right? When you think about chess has 8, 16, 32 pieces. Would you play? Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And a field of 8 by 8, so 64 fields. And chess is still not solved by all the supercomputers in the world. It's solved up to the 7th move. So just think about the extreme complexity that you can have with a game like Master of Orion, that is so huge that we probably would need an entire podcast to list all the features. So you can play that forever. And this is what I found so fascinating, that myself replaying it and hearing from you to replay it, to constantly find new ways. So it's not just the same game that we played back in the day, and every round you play feels completely different. And every time I watch somebody else on YouTube play it, I realize they play a completely different game.
Yeah, it had been more than 20 years since I started playing this game, and when I picked it up to replay it for the first time, I thought, I didn't play nature that often. I'll play a nature wizard. I'll pick Freya, and then through that I got to fix, messing with all the spells that let you alter the terrain. So I used my magic to make the terrain as advantageous as possible around my cities, and make sure there were rare minerals in the mountains, and make sure there were lots of fertile plains to harvest food. And yeah, I was totally able to steamroll the competition, and I had such a fun time, because it was like, oh, look I've just discovered this totally different way to play this beloved game that I've had in my life for 20 years, and I'm still discovering new things about it.
Totally unrelated, or not unrelated, but totally uninteresting probably. Nature spells have, one of the early spells is the war bears, right? Mm-hmm. War bears are one of the early magic units. What do you imagine when you hear the word war bear? You kind of
see, for me, it was His Dark Materials trilogy, because I always thought of there were basically armored bears in that series of novels.
I think I was always thinking about Warhammer. There was also a cast of war bears with heavy armor, and I think they even had, I think it was Warhammer 40k with Gatling guns, and I thought something vicious, something brutal. But due to the nature of the game's graphics, because every unit sprite only has maybe 12 by 8 pixels or so. So these war bears are really tiny sprites, and to me, they were always the cutest unit on the entire field. So the first time I replay this, I saw, oh god, war bears, this is awesome. Because you just see the text. You don't see the unit next to the spell that you can cast to summon them. So I said, oh my god, war bears, this is awesome. And then I got them, and I saw this tiny unit on the field, and I instantly fell in love with them. So they kind of became my favorite unit, even though they're just a little bit strong in the beginning. But I kind of fell in love with war bears. So that was my testimony here. So that's actually beautiful. Yeah, that's actually why I love Master of Magic. I actually don't like the game at all, but war bears, they saved it for me.
Turn me around. It was the war bears, man. That did it.
This is fantastic. Oh, there's another wonderful cheese tactic, which is not even really a cheese tactic. The ghouls in death magic.
Yes.
When you kill another unit with ghouls, they turn into undead and work for you, and they don't even need to eat. So if you just spam ghouls right in the beginning, you have an army that you don't need to provide with food.
But then, of course, the downside to death units is that other units in the game can heal passively turn to turn. Like they'll regain a little bit of health every turn. Death units, you can raise an army from the dead, but they don't heal like regular units. So you got to consider the drawback.
Right. So it's very fascinating. It's very interesting. Can you heal death units in any way? I don't even know. I never played death a lot.
Yeah, some of them have life drain. Like I think there are certain units that I think the only way for them to heal is by attacking and killing other creatures, which very appropriate for death creatures.
One thing that I always liked about the game is, we already talked about this, how this idea of alternate history works within the narrative of this fictional magical universe. And I mean, it even starts out to kind of highlight that. There's an intro, pre-rendered intro, which is very charming. In 1994, the pre-rendered 3D scenes, they looked fascinating back in the day. And today you kind of chuckle about how it looked and felt and sounded.
It's like a moving painting almost. It's such an interesting art style. It's like a little bit painterly.
So what you see is basically the apex of a battle between two magicians. The one magician who is like in his tower looking over the battlefield, and the other magician attacking him with his army, and you see kind of like the clash between the two armies. And this basically underlines what the game is all about. This whole, you create a narrative in your head with the abstract units you see on the bottom. And what I always liked about the setting is you pick a magician, so it's not a faceless unit like in most 4X games, but there's actually a protagonist behind it, and power is measured in wisdom, or especially in books, right?
When I think back about like what first drew me to this game, it was books. It was like the way books featured so prominently, but specifically this is from that golden era of games when you would crack open the box and there would be these detailed, beautifully illustrated, thick manuals filled with lore and flavor text. And I just so distinctly remember, when I was a young kid, like with my mom at Sam's Club, and they had the big bins full of like discount computer software. And I remember it was like, I looked at the box, and I remember opening it and like looking at the manuals inside, and it just like these beautiful, pencil and pen illustrations looking like a Frank Frazetta fantasy novel cover. And I was just like so drawn by it. Like I was like, Mom, I gotta have this game. Like this is, I never had known I could want something so bad until that I was in that moment. And then,
so did you get it immediately?
Oh yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes the games that you have to work for are pretty awesome. You had that too?
That's true. There was plenty of, like when I wanted that PlayStation 2, like I had to work a summer job to save up money for it. That was how we rolled, but it gives you perspective.
Exactly. It increases the value of it, like washing the car of your dad, or mowing the lawn for the seventh time, even though the lawn is already super short, and it's like I can mow it again. I think it grew. All right, just go ahead. Like I just need $10 more for this game. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so like these beautiful manuals, illustrations of the monsters and the world and the lore and everything inside, and then the game itself, like the power of your character is measured in books. Like knowledge comes from books. Books feature prominently in the cutscenes and the spell animations. Yes. There's this notion that you increase your magical power by collecting spell books, because you research these books and uncover meaning to the text bit by bit, and every little bit of meaning you uncover is another spell you get to cast that enhances your power. And it's just such a like a fascinating take on the power fantasy. I really, as someone who was like very bookish as a kid and spent a lot of time in libraries, like just instantly it was like, yep, I'm a wizard. That's me.
Even if you destroy another wizard, there is this little animation where the wizard dies, and you can see his or her book in the background just burst into flames. And it's kind of symbolic for all the wisdom this person accumulated over
the wizard's grimoire.
It's gone. It's evaporated. It goes into nothingness, and it's a very, very fascinating game. And in so many ways, it's so rich in facets. And let's what? I think that's a good part to ask the obligatory question, like, was it a blast from the past? I don't think we even need to ask this, right?
My God, this is, I mean, ultimate blast from the past material as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. It's blast from the past certified by me for sure. And I'm pretty sure that I didn't just play it just for this podcast to prepare myself, but I got back into a game that I almost forgot, and I fell in love with it once again. I know that I'm gonna play this from time to time in the future again. That's why I'm happy that we picked this. It's a fantastic game, and it's absolutely a blast from the past.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say, if you want it, don't hesitate. It's out there. You can buy the official version on GOG, which I think has some nice downloads, scans of the manual.
Yes.
It's also, I think, technically there's a version of it that's abandonware. Obviously we're not encouraging piracy, but I think there is a version of it that is abandonware that you could download. So, however, by hook or by crook, however you want to play this game, it is absolutely worth your time.
Yes, I would recommend the GOG version because it just runs flawlessly. There's also
that's very
interesting
true.
project. Have you come across the network version of the game? Because the game doesn't feature a multiplayer. It's basically just single player.
Yeah, I had read about that. Is that actually a thing? I didn't know if that project had actually come to fruition or not.
No, it works. You can play it via local network. I actually tried it out with a friend. We didn't have a local network, so we had to set up a virtual private network. But you can download it, I think, from SourceForge, and it's a network version of Master of Magic. And the cool side effect of it is that it runs in Windows and it runs in a much higher resolution. So it still uses the same tiles and sprites, but they're a bit smaller, right? So I wouldn't recommend playing it on 1080p or something, but you can play it in Windows, in a window, and what it basically does is it makes the map much larger. You can see more. It's very pleasant to play it.
Multiplayer Master of Magic, say no more, man. I mean, we've just been gushing for the past hour 15 about this wonderful game. I think I know what I'm doing this weekend.
Yes, so we should definitely. Oh God, no, we shouldn't, because I feel like when we play together, then I will be steamrolled by you. So I feel so bad at this game. I always feel bad. The last time, how often did I?
Well, it's also dude. The game's gonna take 15 damn hours. It's certainly if it happens, it'll happen in slow motion. There'll be plenty of time to process it emotionally.
So. Yeah, but no, I'm just kidding. I always feel like I could know so much more about this game, and I always feel like I'm terrible at the game. But on the other side, we should definitely try out playing this together at some point. What do you say?
Yeah, a little bonus episode for this session of Blast from the Past. I like it.
Exactly. Well, if you don't have anything to add, then I think this is a good point to say thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Yes. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you. Yeah, I'm not even going to say what I'm thinking. It's great to be on a podcast with my friend Ragnar. This is super, and I can't wait to do more stuff like this because I'm having a blast. You might even say
a blast from the past.
Yes.
Have a good one.